There's been a lot of talk recently about quiet quitting. You know, that subtle act of not doing anything extra at your job. But how about just quitting, as in retiring early? I've often thought about retiring early, but is that even possible? And if it is, should I? The pandemic changed our society and our lives. And it got a lot of us thinking about what could be and what we really want. Who do we want to work for? Where do we want to live? Do we even want to work at a traditional job anymore? For me, it proved I could live with less, which happens to be one of the first things you need to ask yourself if you're fantasizing about retiring early. But if I could somehow pull this off, will every day be like a day at the beach? Is that even the goal?
The challenge is, frankly, Eric, that because of the financial services industry, there's so much fear around having enough to when you want to retire. So it's all based thinking about the money and not the other aspects of life. The other thing that's really important is that in some ways, I think younger people now are dealing with the issue of the money and the freedom. And what's more important? And I think with the pandemic, what's happened is that people are like, you know what? I'll take freedom. I will live a reduced lifestyle. I think the challenge for some people who are younger is that if they think they can have both.
Reed Dewey is a clinical psychologist who spent years coaching people on what's next after a main career. He also helps employees determine their readiness to retire.
All of us, younger generations moving on forward, we're stuck with the term retirement, which I'll just put it in younger terms. It sucks. It doesn't make sense. People really shouldn't be retiring. If whatever you're doing, you're moving on to something else. And I think maybe what the data is showing is that people want to move on and try new things. And so the point, I think, is that people are stepping back and thinking about, I don't want to retire, but I just don't want to continue maybe doing the same work. There's this thing called an encore career. People want to get into, start their own small business, or volunteer, or travel, or whatever.
So what does the data show? Well, millennials want to retire earlier than their parents, but half don't think they'll ever be able to retire, let alone early.
One of the things that research shows is that people who have this fantasy about retiring and just relaxing, half of the people, this research I've seen, are like, I'm going crazy. If they don't have a focus or sort of a plan, they end up going back to work again.
If I want to pull this off, I figure it probably is a good idea to talk to somebody who actually did it. Justin McCurry lives in North Carolina. He retired at the ripe young age of 33. He touted things like living frugally, aggressively saving and investing early, and having the right personality to not only get there financially, but emotionally.
I would say I never really had a strong identification with my job, my career. It was decent. I did the work, showed up to work 9 to 5, earned a paycheck, but I just never was really tightly bound with the work I was doing. It was more of a way to provide finances to support the family and support my savings and investing goals. In a way, the traditional career employee that works for several decades and is really wrapped up in their identity of doctor, lawyer, engineer, accountant, whatever they're doing for a living. If that's all you know and you've lived and breathed that for 3 or 4 decades, it can be a big challenge to quit and do nothing, air quotes, nothing, in your 50s or 60s, because all you've been doing all your life is working, the same career often.
My own personal anxiety about retiring comes from a real sense of not being employable in traditional corporate America towards the back end of my career. I've seen my share of older people being pushed out before they're financially ready to quit working, and so I'd like to be prepared to retire early, not by choice, but because of necessity.
I asked Justin what it would take for me to be financially independent in, say, the next 10, 15 years.
There's really no way around, saving more money and spending less money. Those are the cornerstones of any successful strategy to retire in a relatively quick span of time. And then there's other things, thinking about flexibility in your retirement plans, retiring overseas somewhere where it's cheaper to live, moving to North Carolina where it's cheaper to live, selling, if you have a house in an expensive area, selling that, using the proceeds to buy another house for cash.
Justin and Reed also mentioned things like having a purpose and social structure outside of work to better prepare yourself for your newfound freedom.
Getting that social interaction. Some people only get that through work, and they really rely on that. And so I think having your interests and pursuing those interests on your own, that's a big part of succeeding from an emotional or the soft side of early retirement, and you get past the money.
So when you're in a job or you're involved in the community, whatever, you have a way you see yourself. And when you strip away that identity and just say, well, I'm just going to chill on the beach and read books or whatever, play tennis, it's not enough for most people. And as you were mentioning, the research shows that people need to be active and engaged, and that's part of having a fulfilling life. And so for somebody who said, well, I'm just going to totally relax and have essentially a vacation, very few people get by on that.
There seems to be a lot more that goes into plotting your permanent escape from the workplace, and money isn't the only hurdle.
I'm still down for the idea, but the question really is, am I down for the sacrifices it would take to get there? I guess the real answer may take a few more days at the beach.